Joining me now is former Georgia Congressman Jack Kingston. He's a senior Trump advisor whose name has been floated for a possible position in the administration. Thanks for talking with me today.
Well, thank you, Chanel, and thank you for letting me come on the show during the campaign. I appreciate the forum.
Absolutely. Congressman, I want to get your thoughts on the divide that we're facing at the moment right now in this country. There are so many people watching right now who firmly believe that if you voted for Trump, you're a racist or you're somehow okay with some of the inflammatory things he said in the past. Can you speak to that? What do you want those people to know right now who are, frankly, so upset?
Well, you know, I understand their disappointment. I've been in politics a long time, and you do get disappointed when your team loses, but you have to give it some time. I think the tempered tone in which Donald Trump spoke 4 a.m. Wednesday morning started things going off well, followed by Hillary Clinton the next day, and then followed off by the meeting with President Obama. And I think just continually to reach out to people, heads of state from other countries, Romney and Kasich within our own party, but talking to the Democrat leaders as well. I think all of that's very, very important. The other thing he needs to do is make sure that the team that he appoints, his cabinet and everybody else, that it looks like America. He will, I believe, send a signal that, you know what, people of all backgrounds and all philosophies are welcomed in my cabinet, and it's not going to be lip service. You will see the names and faces.
You mentioned tone. Can I be honest with you? I have never seen anything like this in my career where people were calling me, and Congressman, they were crying. People were afraid. I mean, people have fear, and they were asking me. I'm like, look, you know, I'm a news anchor, I'm a news host, but I don't know what to tell you. But that's why I thought, well, maybe, you know, Congressman Kingston can speak to that. People are seriously afraid. Should they be?
No, absolutely not. I can promise you, I've been in the back scenes of the campaign, not with the campaign anymore, by the way, but, you know, up close and personal, there's none of this bigotry and racism. You know, Chanel, with John Lewis, authored the bill to build the Civil Rights Museum, the African American History Museum here in Washington, D.C., and yet I was called racist over and over again. I was proud to have a district when I was in Congress that was 30% African American. I live in Savannah, Georgia, which is a 50-50 community, but I was called a racist and a bigot and all kinds of things. So I think there has been some hyperbole that's gotten away from reality, but I can promise you, as a Trump supporter, that I want to reach out. I want an inclusive team, and I believe you are going to find that. Not in a decision-making capacity, but I can promise you those who are going to do everything they can to make sure that these protesters are listened to. You know, if you look at what Dave Chappelle said last night, you look at what former UN Ambassador Andrew Young has said on YouTube, there have been a lot of, I'd say, hardcore Democrats who've said, you know what, I did not vote for the man, but let's give him some time.
And you know what, I think you're right. Listen, I fell asleep last night because I'm doing this show today, but I watched it this morning, and a lot of people watched that Dave Chappelle. You're right, his monologue. I think the challenge is they're wondering, okay, can somebody else speak to the people who are, you know, doing these racist things? There have been 200 plus, you know, different things that have happened in South Philadelphia, all over the country. I think that's who somebody is saying, look, talk to them, tell them to stop.
You know what, and I would say that they need to absolutely stop, but I'd say also the people who have piñatas of Donald Trump, President-elect of the United States of America, and they're showing their hatred through small children and getting small children to hit in effigy this symbol of Donald Trump. I mean, to me, if somebody had done that on Barack Obama, we would have never heard the end of it. So the shoe has to fit both feet, but I think that's what leadership's all about on the Democrat, the Republican, and the Libertarian side, to show, look, we understand you're disappointed, but that's not the way to move forward with your agenda. We need to work together.
Let's talk about moving forward. I want to play for you what President-elect Trump said about border security. This is in an interview that will air on 60 Minutes tonight. Take a listen.
Are you really going to build a wall?
Yes.
They're talking about a fence in the Republican Congress. Would you accept a fence?
For certain areas I would, but certain areas the wall is more appropriate. I'm very good at this. It's called construction. But
so part wall, part fence?
Yeah, it could be. There could be some fencing.
He also said he'll keep parts of Obamacare, a far cry, of course, from getting it. But of the many campaign promises Trump made, are there any that you consider non-negotiable, that the president-elect cannot afford to walk back, if you will?
I think he's going to have to stick with immigration security. That's going to have to be passed through both houses in Congress, and there's going to be some amendments to it. The same thing with Obamacare, same thing with tax reform. You know, the Republicans are going to have a plan, the Democrats are going to have a plan, and it has to be cobbled together. I think he absolutely will stick with his campaign promises, though, of immigration security, repealing Obamacare, renegotiating trade agreements, conservative judges, energy, and infrastructure. I want to say this about infrastructure. That roads, bridges, and dams brings Democrats and Republicans together, because those are jobs programs that everybody can invest in. So I think that's going to be one of the major initiatives out of the chute, and I think it will be one that will bring people together.
Former Congressman Jack Kingston, thank you so much for talking with me this afternoon. It was a good discussion.
Thank you, Chanel.
Joining me now is Victoria DeFrancesco, a professor at the University of Texas and an MSNBC contributor. Let's dig right in. Victoria, do you believe these fears are valid?
Absolutely. There is a lot of fear in the Hispanic community right now. Two levels of fear. I think for those persons who have undocumented persons in their family, the fear is at a fever pitch. I was just talking to a friend of mine, a high-level municipal official in Los Angeles, and she was telling me that families are afraid for their kids to go to school, that they're not taking their kids to school because they're afraid that there might be dragnets when they go to pick up the kids from school. So there's this tangible fear that we're already seeing just days after the election. And I also know that folks who are dreamers are also feeling that immediate fear of what happens to their status on January 21st after President Donald Trump comes into office.
I want to follow up on what you just said, but let me add Senator Bernie Sanders' comments and his remarks onto this. These fears in a recent New York Times op-ed. He said, quote, "Look, I am deeply distressed to hear stories of Americans being intimidated and harassed in the wake of Mr. Trump's victory, and I hear the cries of families who are living in fear of being torn apart. Rest assured, there is no compromise on racism, bigotry, xenophobia, and sexism. We will fight it in all its forms whenever and wherever it reemerges," end quote. Here's the thing. We heard, Senator Sanders, and you just talked about Congressman Ellison, as we heard earlier. What are we going to do? I mean, moving forward, are you gearing up for this fight over immigration already? I mean, he's not president yet.
Right. So I think you see a couple of different strategies here. You see a grassroots-based strategy where organizations are saying, we will protest, we will keep in the streets, we will keep our voice heard continually. And then you see the more governmental approach, where you're seeing cities saying, say Democratic cities or cities that have friendlier policies toward immigrants, saying, what can we do with our municipal laws? And then also at the state level, what can we do with our state-based legislation to protect undocumented persons, to protect dreamers, or to protect immigrant families? So I think you're going to see a range of responses within the Latino community, and ultimately the eye on the prize is going to be 2 years, 4 years from now in seeing someone at the top of the ticket who can better protect Latinos at the national level.
There's been so much talk of unity. Does President-elect Trump have any real hope of uniting Americans after alienating so many of them through this, his campaign rhetoric?
Well, that is the hope, and within that fear, you do see some folks saying, I am hoping, I am praying to God that what he said was just rhetoric to get him elected, that it was just him trying to be angry and get folks mobilized by anger. But once he gets into office, he's going to tone down. So we do see some cautious optimism among some components of the Latino community, but the fear is still pervasive, whether it's that flat-out panic that we're seeing in some families or that fear of saying, I really, really hope he doesn't do what he said. It's across the board, Chanel.
And here's the challenge with that rhetoric. A surge in hate crimes, has been reported by the Southern Poverty Law Center since Trump's victory. How do you explain this? And is this a reflection of what lies ahead in the next 4 years?
I hope not, but I fear that at least in the short term, we probably will see that. We see two groups of persons in this country that are very frustrated. On the one side, we see Trump supporters frustrated by the Obama administration, and now we're seeing Latinos and folks who did not support Trump frustrated as well, and it's coming to a head. So I think that the next couple of months are so critical in a Trump administration for him to try to unite both of these groups together, saying to his supporters, let's calm down, let's roll up our sleeves, let's get to work, and telling those folks who did not vote for him, I am your president, and I am going to work to better this country for all and not keep to that divisive nature that got him elected.
And finally, I have to talk about the fact that exit poll data suggests that President-elect Trump landed almost 1/3 of the Latino vote. That's in stark contrast to the Democrats' expectations. Where did the Democrats miss the mark? And then what do you hear from Latinos who voted for Trump?
Sure. Well, Shana, one thing. So we saw that exit polls had Latinos voting for Trump at 29%. However, we do see two of the main reputable Latino pollsters come out and challenge that. Latino Decisions had Latino turnout at 18% for Trump, and the Pew Research Center had Latinos turning out at 19%. So I'm resting more at that 20% mark. But nevertheless, you would think, why are Latinos coming out to vote for Trump after the campaign he ran? And quite frankly, the same reason a lot of white supporters came out for Trump, because he had that perspective of, we've got to improve our economic situation, we've got to turn the corner, I want to change things for you. So I think you did see a lot of economic optimism among those Latinos that voted for Trump.
Victoria DeFrancesco, good discussion. Thank you for talking with me today. Donald Trump's election has prompted a dire warning from America's largest civil rights organization, the NAACP. Take a look. Even as we extend our congratulations to President-elect Donald Trump, the NAACP most bluntly notes that the 2016 campaign has regularized racism, standardized anti-Semitism, de-exceptionalized xenophobia, and mainstreamed misogyny. So let's talk about this. Joining me now is the NAACP President and CEO Cornell William Brooks. Thank you for talking with me today.
It's good to talk with you, Chanel.
In that same statement, you also wrote that the NAACP is willing to work with the Trump administration to realize racial justice concerns. Do you believe that will actually happen? And frankly, how do you see that playing out?
We are, in fact, hopeful, but hope has to have an empirical basis. So the president-elect's victory speech was a hopeful sign. His appointments will be telling. The presence of certainly of Steve Bannon in the mix is discouraging in terms of his association with the alt-right. But we're willing to work with the administration, and as we indicated, to the extent that the president-elect stands with the Constitution, with America's civil rights agenda, we're willing to stand beside him. To the extent he does not, we will stand against him and certainly oppose any kind of agenda that runs contrary to our values and our mission.
I want to get your take on this. On Friday, filmmaker Michael Moore shared his thoughts on the election. Here's a piece of that, and then I'll get your response.
Sure.
You have to accept that millions of people who voted for Barack Obama, some of them once, some of them twice, changed their minds this time. They're not racist. They twice voted for a man whose middle name is Hussein. That's the America you live in.
What's your response to that?
Well, it's clear that Donald J. Trump won without the popular vote, with 25% of the vote, and undoubtedly with suppressed votes. Donald J. Trump has a mandate, I should say does not have a mandate, and certainly doesn't have a mandate for hate. People are looking for change. They're looking for relief of economic anxieties. They're looking for long-term, well-paying jobs, and they're looking for a secure economic future. To the extent that he speaks to those concerns, he can move the country forward. But all the misogyny, the racism, the anti-Semitism, the Islamophobia that has been stirred up and the consequence of this toxic campaign is something that he has to address. Note, Mr. Trump will become the commander-in-chief, but people expect him to also be the value setter, the example setter in chief. And that means speaking against the very rhetoric that we heard over and over in terms of this campaign. He has to do that.
Let's talk about some of the exit polls that we saw on Tuesday. What's striking is that Trump did better with African-American voters than Mitt Romney did in 2012. How do you explain that?
Well, let's note this. Fewer people turned out to vote across the board, across all demographic groups. So Mr. Trump won with fewer votes than Mitt Romney did in losing. So we need to be clear about this. There's no mandate for hate. There's not a clear message in terms of him being a persuasive or compelling figure to African Americans. what his candidacy does say and his victory does say is that the country is looking for fundamental change with respect to improvement of the people's economic well-being and their economic security. Beyond that, I'm not sure how much you can extrapolate. I'm not.
Right.
Certainly, you can't assert that he is the choice of African Americans, or the choice of most people in this country in terms of the popular vote.
I also want to get your take on a new article in The Nation. It says there were 868 fewer polling places in the state of North Carolina. And for example, just one early voting location in Greensboro, North Carolina, where there were 16 in 2012. I just spoke with North Carolina Congresswoman Renee Elmers, who said it didn't affect turnout in her opinion. What are you hearing?
That is not the case. Here's what we saw. In the course of this campaign, roughly 10 cases of voter suppression as attested to in the courts. The NAACP went to court in Texas to save 600,000 votes, 500,000 votes in Alabama, and 5% of the electorate in terms of votes that were imperiled as a consequence of voter suppression. We saw fewer polling places. We saw on the eve of the election 4,000 votes that had to be put back, voter registrations put back in play through the actions of a federal district court judge. This election took place under a cloud of democratic and civic shame. It is disgusting. It is unconscionable that the NAACP and so many others have to go to court again and again to protect the right to vote.
In this case, though, do you think it affected the outcome?
Most definitely. Most definitely. Note the places where the election was particularly tight. In North Carolina, certainly Wisconsin and Ohio, the very places where we've seen voter suppressive efforts again and again.
Here's the challenge. I feel like we're tap dancing, and I've been doing it for the last hour and a half, if you will. We're tap dancing between people who believe that things were unfair. You talk about maybe the fact that these changes affected the outcome, and then at the same time striking a conciliatory tone and saying, you know what, we have to move forward. In fact, let me do this. On Monday, President Obama was stumping in Michigan for Hillary Clinton. Here's what he had to say about the now president-elect, and then I'll talk more about it. Go ahead.
Donald Trump is temperamentally unfit to be commander-in-chief. Look, think about this. Over the weekend, his campaign took away his Twitter account. Now, if your closest advisors don't trust you to tweet, then how can we trust him with the nuclear codes?
Do you see what I mean? Leaders have influence. So if we have the President of the United States saying that this man is unfit, and then we had during the campaign, we had, you know, Trump saying all of these inflammatory things. And then now you're supposed to tell all of these people who were fighting, or, you know, who were rooting for you on both sides, oh, no. Let's mend fences. Let's move on. Kumbaya. It's not so easy to do. Am I making sense?
No, you absolutely are making sense. But here are the facts. We cannot sugarcoat what we endured during the campaign. We have to be candid and blunt about Mr. Trump as a candidate, and we also need to be honest, if perhaps a little hopeful, about who he might be and how he might serve as president. These two things have to be held in tension, and we have to reconcile them. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Trump was a deeply, deeply troubling candidate. And to the extent that past performance is a prediction of future conduct, this is very troubling with respect to how he will lead as president. That being said, when he takes the oath of office, when he places his hand on the Bible, he then becomes our president. And by our, we mean he owes a duty of loyalty, and he is accountable to we the people. We Muslim Americans, immigrant Americans, LGBTQ Americans, African Americans, people of every walk and every region and religion in this country. He has to do that. So we're hopeful about that, but we are also realistic about what we may need to do if he acts as president as he did as candidate.
I'll leave it there. Hopeful and realistic. Those will be the two words you'll leave us with. Cornell William Brooks, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk more about this. Joining me now, Yamiche Alcindor, national reporter for the New York Times, and Josh Barrow, senior editor for Business Insider and an MSNBC contributor. Good morning to both of you. Or I guess I should say good afternoon, depending on where you live. So, Yamiche, I'll start with you. What more can you tell us about Secretary Clinton's call to donors yesterday?
Well, it's really interesting. In this call, she basically, she wanted to lay blame on on the FBI director for saying that he was the one who really stopped the momentum. But you saw Hillary Clinton kind of doing what presidential candidates have done in the past. In 2000, Karl Rove was saying that the reason why George Bush, why the election was so close, was because there was a late conversation about a DUI that he got. Other presidents have really focused on it. Bill Clinton himself was talking about this idea that people were talking about the campaign, the Chinese giving money to his campaign, and that's why he had issues when he was even though he beat H.W. Bush. But really, it's one of those things where I think candidates are trying to find a reason to blame other people other than themselves. Hillary Clinton, in some ways, was a deeply flawed candidate, and there were a lot of reasons why Comey's press conference would even affect her. If she was a strong candidate and people really believed her and trusted her, then this wouldn't be an issue. So I think in some ways, this is Hillary Clinton kind of blaming people when she should probably be looking at herself.
But is there a thread of truth to it? Is it a fair point that perhaps maybe they, this motivated them?
I mean, I think two things can be true at the same time. It can be true that Hillary Clinton would have won if not for the Comey letter, and that if Hillary Clinton had been a better candidate, she would have been able to win in spite of the Comey letter. So I think, in any close election, you can point to a huge number of things and say if this one thing had been different, the outcome would have been different. She didn't need that many more votes in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania for us to have a completely different discussion today, and she's probably going to win the popular vote once they're done counting in California by as much as 1.5 points nationally. So I think on some level it's fair to say that the Comey letter hurt her, but I think that there was a series of mistakes going back years, going back especially to her choice to basically spend 2013 and 2014 making as much money as she possibly could, giving speeches to Goldman Sachs and everywhere else, and it really undermined her message and trust in her through the whole campaign.
Did she make any suggestions, though, about potential missteps that maybe, 2020 hindsight, they wouldn't have done?
I haven't heard them say that, but I think that what we're going to see in the Clinton campaign is probably a lot of soul searching about not only kind of what she could have done differently, but also kind of her perception and how she goes forward. Are we going to see her be giving these speeches again? Are we going to see her have some sort of role in the Democratic Party? Obviously, she's not going to be the leader of the Democratic Party, but I think it's going to inform how Democrats go forward.
Let's talk about our new president-elect. I have to get used to saying that. Here we go. Trump gets ready to receive these intel briefings. The Washington Post, Bob Woodward, suggests that he's in for a rude awakening. Take a look at this. Here's the headline. Trump is about to learn the deep secrets that terrified Obama in 2008. What do you think? Do you think the reality of being commander-in-chief is starting to sink in for Trump?
I don't know. I mean, my sense from the reporting is that he himself was shocked to have won the election. But Donald Trump is 70 years old. He has about 40 years in public life to date, and his personality is what it is. He is an erratic, vengeful, intemperate guy. I think that I certainly hope that the presidency will weigh on him in a way that causes him to behave in a manner that is more measured, to be careful when he does things, because his mistakes will become a lot more costly now than they ever have been in his previous public life. But I don't have a ton of hope for Donald Trump to change, because I don't think he's changed in the past.
I want to ask you, I know you're writing about fear of minority groups driving these anti-Trump protests. You heard Kellyanne Conway and Rudy Giuliani, a lot of them saying, you know what, have the Democrats tell their people, if you will, to calm down. Do you know what I mean? Do you think that perhaps maybe he should come forward and try to, it sounds cheesy, but heal the nation, if you will, with a speech or to say something?
I think it's going to all be about his policies. If he puts Rudy Giuliani at the head, if he becomes maybe attorney general and stop and frisk is expanded, and you have police departments, the DOJ doesn't want to go into police departments and investigate them like they're doing under President Obama. It doesn't matter what he says. It's going to all come down to whether or not people of color and frankly African Americans feel comfortable with him as a commander-in-chief, and if they really feel like they're getting justice. I have a story out yesterday. The mother of Eric Garner has already written a letter to the Department of Justice basically begging for them to make a decision about her son's case, because she feels like once Trump is in office, they're either one, not going to give her the justice that she wants, or two, that they're just going to completely ignore the case. So that's real fears that people have, and it's really going to be up to Donald Trump whether or not he's going to treat people fairly.
You mentioned Giuliani. Josh, I want to play for you what Giuliani said about the blind trust Trump is setting up so his children can take over the business. Take a listen.
It's kind of unrealistic to say you're going to take the business away from the three people who are running it and give it to some independent person. And remember, they can't work in the government because of the government rule against nepotism. So you'd be putting them out of work. So I think you're going to have to fashion something that is very comfortable, something that's fair, something that assures the American people, as he said, he has no interest in what's going on in the business.
What's your reaction? We left the finance question for you.
Well, so first of all, I wish we would all stop calling it a blind trust, because it's not a blind trust.
What should we call it?
It's just a trust. The thing is, the idea with a blind trust is that you don't know what's in the trust. You don't know what your assets are invested in, and somebody runs them who doesn't take orders from you. And neither of those things is going to be true here. Donald Trump obviously talks regularly with his children. I think they will have influence in the administration, even if they can't technically go to work in it. And then he's going to know what the assets are. And that's actually even if you were trying to do this in a way that was transparent, that would be a harder issue to deal with. He owns these buildings that have his name on them. So it's even if you gave the assets to somebody else to manage, Trump would know what his investments were and what actions he could take that would advantage or disadvantage them.
So what's the buzz kind of behind the scenes? Does that seem to be the biggest concern about this handover, if you will?
I'd say no. I mean, it'd have to be like lower than number 60 on my list. I'm afraid of international geopolitical crises. He's fiddling with some land use thing in some city where he owns a building. That's unfortunate, and there may be opportunities for him to enrich himself. But I'm so busy worrying about so many other things that I think could matter a lot more for the world. That this, what would normally be a blockbuster issue of conflict of interest, I think is actually relatively unimportant compared to so many other things.
So here's the thing. I'm glad you just brought that up, because it turns out we have a little bit more time, so I'll let you come up with something brilliant to say. Here's the deal. We cannot live in this sustained state of concern and panic and being angry, and it's just not a sustainable way to live. At least that's not the way a lot of people want to live. So then moving forward, what can we say? What can we do? Or what are you telling yourself, frankly, just wait and see? You said a speech won't work. Is the proof in the pudding, if you will, and wait and see what happens?
I think it's going to be all about waiting and seeing what happens, because even when I've been talking to Trump supporters who are excited about him being elected, they're saying that this man called him, one of his supporters called him a wild card. This idea is that even the people who supported him don't actually know what they were supporting. They think they know what law and order is. They think they know what making America great means. But in reality, if he doesn't build a wall, and he's talking about now building a fence, and if he's talking about amending Obamacare and not repealing it, that's going to make even his own base very angry. So I think that even the people who put him into office are actually in a wait and see. They're happy, they're really excited, but they also don't know what to expect.
I promised my journalism professors 20 years ago that I would never use the phrase "time will tell," but that's all I can say. Yami Shalcindor and Josh Farrow, good discussion.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll have many more. Thank you, guys. When Donald Trump won the presidential election, he made a promise in his first tweet to help the forgotten man and woman of America. Can he do that with his economic plan? Let's dig in. Joining me now, Rick Newman, columnist for Yahoo Finance. Rick, good afternoon to you.
Hi.
In your latest column, you lay out Trump's economic targets. Let's take a look in 4 main categories. And if he hits them, you say he can bring back the prosperity he's promised. So where do you see at this point his biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge is going to be connecting the actions, the things that Congress can do, to actual job creation in the places of the country where we really need jobs. So Trump basically has a supply-side economic plan. He's saying that if you cut everybody's taxes, individuals and businesses, put more spending money in people's pockets, they will spend the money, and that will somehow create more jobs. Now, the hard part here is, how does that actually create jobs? It's just not clear how he's going to do that. His trade policies are supposed to create new incentives for companies to build more manufacturing facilities here in the United States, but it's not clear that his incentives will work, and it's also not clear if those will end up doing more harm than good. We don't really know if he's actually going to do what he said. Finally, the big infrastructure program we've been hearing about, that's probably the most direct way that Congress can do something, spend money in a way that actually will create jobs.
But can he fix the infrastructure and build a wall and do all of that and reduce the national debt? It sounds impossible.
It is pretty darn hard. So his infrastructure plan does not require very much federal spending. Basically, there's just one tax incentive there. The idea is to get private investors interested in these types of projects. This is a thing that happens out there. There are groups that do invest in infrastructure projects. The problem is, for this model to work, there have to be tolls or user fees or some kind of revenue that actually goes back to the investors, and most of our roads just aren't funded that way. So again, he's got an interesting idea, but it just doesn't seem like the infrastructure part is going to apply to very many projects, and I think it's very unlikely that all of a sudden every place where we have some road construction, suddenly there are going to be these new tolls. I don't think voters are going to go for that either. So a lot of unanswered questions on that.
You touched on this just for a bit, but I want to look at the numbers here. When talking jobs, Trump wants to create 25 million of them over the course of 10 years. That's about 2.5 million jobs per year. So is that a stretch then?
That is doable, but here's the catch. Right now, our pace of job creation right now is 2.4 million jobs per year, so we're almost there. The catch is you can't have a recession in that 10-year period, because when you have a recession, usually you lose jobs, and so when you average it out, I mean, you know, recessions just happen, and in fact, it's been a while since the last recession, so in a way, there's probably a reasonable likelihood we will have a recession during the next 4 years, and that's when all the damage gets done. So in order to compensate for the jobs lost during a recession, you probably have to create 4 million or 5 million jobs during peak years. So that would be double the pace of job creation we have now in order to account for a recession. That is a stretch.
So we obviously want the results, but there's still a big question mark today then as far as how he's going to do all this.
Yeah, we may not even have the results 4 years from now because these things do not happen overnight.
Rick Newman, thank you for talking with me today. Still ahead, what's fueling a